To another of our headline stories this hour. The World Anti-Doping Agency has faced a backlash from global sports governing bodies over its handling of Russia's doping scandal. It's been revealed that the president of the Summer Olympic Federations reportedly sent a damning letter to the agency just hours before Russia escaped a blanket ban from Rio.
The fight against doping in sport seems woefully inadequate and the current system is unfit for purpose. An unfortunate situation for which WADA, as the primary agency in this respect, must accept a major part of the responsibility.
Well, to look further into this, I'm happy to say joining me in the studio is Emily Sue to discuss the controversy and everything around it, because we've been talking about this for a while, Emily. The letter, that's what we've just heard there, sent by the president of the Summer Olympic Federation. It's only the latest development of a saga that's been going on for quite some time.
Exactly, Yunan. And judging from all the developments we've seen over the past few weeks, particularly the past week, I guess if I can use a sport to describe the level of disarray within the sports community and the infighting between all the different governing bodies, it would be tennis and passing the ball to the other's court, with nobody really taking responsibility and everybody's just blaming one another. Let's first take a listen to what the IOC chief had to say.
The IOC is not responsible for the fact that different information which was offered to WADA already a couple of years ago was not being followed up.
So as we heard just there, the IOC chief is blaming the World Anti-Doping Agency, WADA, for not doing something earlier when the doping scandal first broke 2 years ago. Some, however, believe it's more of a question over the amount of power that WADA holds. Let's take a listen.
I think it's time to give WADA independent strength and the ability and power to take care of situations like this. WADA had that initial power. They would have given a blanket ban to the Russians.
In a sense, WADA has got us into this mess because all the Russian athletes who are now being banned, many of them got through clean dope tests through WADA accredited laboratories.
Well, aside from this argument over who to blame, keep in mind that in the sporting community, there's another discussion going on between those who insist that if we let Team Russia join the Olympics, Russia has been accused of state-sponsored doping program that would tarnish the reputation of the Olympic movement, and those who insist that the clean Russian athletes really shouldn't be punished for the actions of dirty athletes.
Yeah, for weeks now, the story has been dominating world headlines, hasn't it? We've heard from top sporting officials, governing bodies being under intense pressure was one of the quotes I heard, to put an end to all this.
Well, it's understandable that a story to this scale is covered by media outlets all over the world. But the editorial stances some of these outlets have taken on is really just adding fuel to the fire. And this is evident in the press conference that the IOC chief, Bach, hosted yesterday. And you can see the accusatory questions and the provocatively worded questions just fired at him. Let's take a listen.
Do you accept that this is a huge failure of the IOC?
How do you repair this kind of division that seems to be hitting the Olympic movement?
How damaging to the credibility of these games is this chaos, this confusion?
Some have described it as a new form of a Cold War that has also reached sport. Would you share that view?
You've come in for some personal criticism over the Russian situation, including that you were politically influenced by the Russian delegation. How do you respond to that?
Well, the IOC had been under immense pressure and criticized by the mainstream media for not issuing a blanket ban on Russian athletes. And they've also been criticized for passing the buck to the international sports federations and letting them decide the fate of the 250 Russian athletes that will now apply to compete in Rio. And that's probably one of the reasons why the IOC just 2 days ago decided to have this new 3-member panel, saying that they will have the final say over the fate of those 250 Russian athletes.
This panel of 3 will decide to accept or reject that final proposal. Clearly, it will depend on each individual athlete. There isn't a kind of, they won't get them all together in one go. I think it will be an ad hoc meeting right up until, well, during this week, I would think, or the week to come.
This is an absolute mess at this juncture. We've got inconsistent processes. It's just a mess.
OK, so we've got very tight timing, as the IOC spokesperson just admitted. 4 days left until the 5th of August. That's when the opening ceremony starts at the Olympics. We've got 250 Russian athletes really waiting in limbo to hear just what they assume that they're going to be taking part, but they're not quite sure at this stage. And it is the athletes bearing the brunt of all this doping scandal, isn't it? The clean athletes who are just waiting and want to take part.
Exactly, and the 250 of them, as you mentioned, they're already in Rio. And not only do they have to train themselves physically to compete in the games, they also have to recover psychologically from all of this relating to the doping scandal. And many of them probably wouldn't even find out whether or not they're competing just hours before the opening ceremony.
I really do feel for the athletes. This is absolutely dreadful by way of preparation, mental preparation, and even their physical preparation. How do they actually make themselves focus on this games?
Right, so there we have. We've got the IOC issuing a blanket ban last week on Russian athletes, welcomed by Russia that did not happen. But the IOC also set forward some very strict rules for Russian athletes before they can actually take part in Rio. Now, that has raised concerns, hasn't it, about the new rules and comparisons with other countries and their athletes.
Exactly. And in fact, some would argue that there are double standards applied to the rules to Russian athletes and sportsmen elsewhere. And I'll just read you a clause from the Olympic Charter that says the enjoyment of the rights and freedoms set forth in this Olympic Charter shall be secured without discrimination of any kind, such as national or social origin. And we can now take a listen to this guest and her thoughts on this.
We're judging one nation in a different way than we're judging the rest of the world. What about those athletes who've been able to go to the Games, who have already committed doping offences, but just because they are not Russian, they have been able to step into the Games?
Despite this, what the guest said, as well as the Olympic Charter that I just quoted, however, we found examples of U.S. athletes who have been tested positive for doping before but allowed to compete in Rio this year, versus Russian athletes who's never been tested positive but banned from the Games this year.
RT's Emily Sue manoeuvring us through all the twists and turns, and there's been a few this past few weeks. Thank you very much for that. An alleged Russian connection in Hillary Clinton's email scandal. We have more on that after the break.